So we start with John Stonehouse, released on bail yesterday. He took the opportunity to attack the bail and remand system in British prisons, and it is that subject that he has agreed to come in and discuss with us at further length tonight. John Stonehouse, what's wrong with our bail system?
Well, in the first place, there are far too many unconvicted defendants who are kept unnecessarily in prison. I was in Brixton, as you know, and there are over 1,000 men in Brixton who are facing trial. They haven't been convicted. They're kept there incarcerated, sometimes for months on end. And the physical conditions at Brixton are really quite intolerable in this year of 1975.
Can you tell me a little about those physical conditions?
The prison is a very old prison, designed for, originally, I understand, 250 females. And it's been built up a bit since, but the basic design was for that number of inmates. And there are now over 1,000 men there. In my wing alone, the C wing, there were over 300 men. It rose at one stage to 340 men in a wing which was designed for single cell occupation of just over 100 men. Most of the men were at 3 to a cell, and in these hot conditions you can imagine how terrible those conditions are. Particularly when you remember that these men are locked in their cells for up to 23 hours a day, except when they collect their meals, which they have to eat in their cells. These conditions are inhuman and degrading. Degrading to the men.
Were you degraded? Did you feel
and
degraded?
Degrading to the men who have to administer the prisons, these jailers who have to do this job. No, I didn't feel degraded. I've been through a lot of experiences before. I can, I hope, cope with this sort of thing, at least for the period of time that I was there. But if one is in that condition for months and months on end, without any communication with the outside world apart from your family, who can occasionally come to see you, you can imagine what it can do to some men. And it's this aspect of the remand system that I think is so intolerable, because a man who's charged with an offence may or may not have committed it, but to be charged in the first place and to be dragged out of the bosom of his family, to have adverse press publicity, to lose his job, and then, on top of all that, to have to sit in a miserable place like Brixton until he comes up for his trial, puts him at a decided disadvantage when the trial takes place. The man is disheartened before he gets up in the court.
Are you disheartened?
No, I'm not disheartened. I am never disheartened. But I have been in a very fortunate position. I've had a lot of friends outside. There's been a great deal of publicity about my case. And as a result of that, I eventually got bail that I should have got a long time ago.
I mean,
but I am concerned about the thousands of men who are not in the fortunate position that I was in. I had a certain opportunity to get my case across in the press, which they don't have. And I am very sorry for these chaps.
If I may interrupt you
I think someone must give them some consideration.
John Stonehouse, I mean, you said kept there unnecessarily, and the reason that magistrates give and the police give when they argue against bail is basically to stop the chap doing a bunk. And in the case of your own case, of a magistrate faced with a man who vanished from his constituency, who vanished from his family, who vanished from Parliament, and eventually turns up in Australia via Miami, isn't that magistrate got very good reason to ponder giving bail?
Yeah, well, look, I don't want to go over my own case, but I think as you've raised the point, I should make this in reply. I disappeared in extraordinary circumstances. I grant you that. It was part of a breakdown. I did not abscond from any charges, and no charges were brought against me until nearly 4 months after I had disappeared. I had bail for 4 months in Australia. I was never once refused bail in Australia. And the question was asked, and should I think still be asked, how is it that a man who is given bail in a Commonwealth country to which he doesn't belong for all that period is refused bail in Britain.
Yes.
And I came across, and I want now to talk about the other men, because I am, as I said before, concerned about them. I want people to forget about my case. I have got my freedom. I value it. I appreciate all the help I've had to obtain it. But I'm now concerned that we should direct attention at the iniquities of the bail system. We should be concerned equally about the men who are still inside. Nearly 50% of the men in Brixton are there for comparatively minor offences. Even if they're found guilty, they won't be given sentences which involve custody. And many of them are there as first offenders. They haven't absconded or done anything of that description. Many of them have got homes to go to, jobs to do. And you asked the question, why does a court decide that they should be there? And I'd like to try and answer it. I think the reason is this. The police in this country are involved in the business not of getting justice, but of finding criminals. They've got to get convictions. That's the name of the game as far as they're concerned. And to get convictions, it's much easier to put the defendant at a disadvantage. So automatically, the police are going into the courts and asking that bail should not be given on the most spurious of grounds. And so, although I blame the courts, I think there's not enough independence in our courts. I think the magistrate should be far more independent of the advice that they get from the police. But apart from that, let's put the finger on the people who are really responsible. The men who are responsible for this state of affairs are in the police, they're in the DPP, and it goes to the
public prosecutions.
Yes, it goes up to the Attorney General himself. There should be a clear directive that in all cases of first offenders, of non-serious offences that do not involve crimes of violence or serious crimes, where there is no evidence of previous absconsion, there should be the automatic granting of bail, as there is indeed in other countries.
John Stonehouse?
That is what I think we should have, so we can relieve our prisons of this terrible overcrowding that is so disgusting.
John Stonehouse, you know, if I'd had this conversation with you a couple of years ago,
Sure.
in the minds of everybody watching it, they'd have said he's right or he's wrong on the weight of the arguments that you put forward. But nobody watching us tonight can separate John Stonehouse of the last year with your arguments. And you must realise that in the land you are not the most unmitigated hero that exists, nor the most popular MP. Do you not find it strange that you should be sitting here making an ordinary political argument?
No, I think that it's the duty of all of us in public life to learn from our experience.
You still regard yourself as an MP, very much as an MP.
Of course I'm an MP, I've got a job to do, and I'm doing that job by presenting what I feel is an important public issue in relation to bail. And I'm taking advantage of the unusual experience that I've had, and I think my constituents would expect me to do that, and I think the country would expect me to do it. And I'm taking advantage of this experience to bring forward these matters of public concern.
This whole experience you've had, I mean, your mother, in fact, wrote to newspapers saying that you were mentally disturbed in so many words. And again, isn't a magistrate taking a reasonable view not to release a mentally disturbed person? Because a mentally disturbed person may do mentally disturbed things, may he not?
Well, she's changed her view about that now. But it's not for me to give an opinion. All I can say is that I feel extremely well, and I refer you again to the decision that was made in Australia. I had bail there without any problem for 4 months.
In no part of your attitude that you are mentally disturbed, no?
Oh, no, of course not. I think that in this frenetic society that exists in England, particularly in public life, I can see the symptoms of disturbance in quite a lot of people. And this is one of the problems we have in this country that I think we've got to face up to. That people in public life are under intense pressure. We have in this country something approaching civil war coming, and it's terribly serious, the pressure that people are under, that they are suppressing. Anyway, that's another story. I think we've got to come back to
But
this
I'm quite
business
interested in what you say, civil war. I mean, that's a. You
well,
can't. I can't leave you. I can't leave the word civil war hanging in the air.
There is a civil war going on in Ulster at the moment. There's more violence in Ulster than in any other West European country, Portugal included. And we kid ourselves in this country that we are in control of the position. We are not.
And these strains act on all public men?
I think that the strains of public life for my colleagues in the House of Commons, particularly those who are ministers, are absolutely extraordinary. When you look back 50 years, or even 25 years, the strains were never what they are today. Years ago, House of Commons would adjourn for 7 or 8 months of the year. The Prime Minister, even in Asquith's day, would go to Scotland and be there for 5 or 6 months at a stretch, not come down to Whitehall at all. That sort of opportunity to relax is not available to us now. And you can see the strain on the faces of anybody in public life. I think we've got to be concerned about this. But if I may bring you back to the original subject, I think we've got to have a reform of the prison system. We mustn't clutter up our jails with people who are going to be acquitted anyway at the end of the day. We must give them the opportunity that I've now got, that they're entitled to have, to prepare their defence in reasonable circumstances. And I hope, as a result of my experience, people will now be directing attention at the fact, this very disquieting fact, that there are these many thousands of people who are in jail tonight who shouldn't be there.
Now, you talked about preparing your defence. Is it difficult? Just how do you prepare your defence if you're in a remand prison?
Well,
presumably you had some small advantage.
No, I had no particular advantage. I was in the same position as any other defendant. They're all unconvicted, you see, at Brixton. There are precisely 14 rooms in which they can meet their solicitors or counsel. And there are a limited number of hours during the day when solicitors can come in to meet them. And they have to make appointments to come in. And sometimes they make appointments and they come to the prison. They have to wait over an hour, as my solicitor had to wait, before they can actually see their client. And they go into a room. It's very hot, particularly these days. A very small window, bars, and it's in this situation they've got to try to discuss what may be a very complicated case, and the whole operation is brought to an end as far as the solicitor is concerned about 5:30, and the solicitor may have only had half an hour or so, and then he's yanked out. It's an impossible position, particularly when, in a complicated case, a solicitor has to bring documents and has to go over these with his client.
Was it precisely this that the magistrate had in mind yesterday? I mean,
exactly.
Mr. Barraclough said this yesterday.
But it applies to the other chaps as well. But I wish we had time to give you some
examples. We have
examples.
time. We've extended our time. So
examples of the sort of people who are in prison. Minor offences.
Go ahead.
Men who have been accused of stealing half a pound of butter from a shop. Men who've been accused of stealing a pint of milk. One man who was accused of smoking in a non-smoking compartment. These sort of people are in prison partly because there's nowhere else for them to go, and partly because the police are behaving in this high-handed way to them. And it is intolerable.
Like the police, do you?
It is intolerable. I think the police need to change their attitude to society. They need to realize that they're part of society. They're not fighting against society. They should be part of it. They've got to think of the totality of what they're trying to achieve. Too many policemen, not all of them, of course, you can't generalize about that, but too many policemen are locked into a narrow attitude of mind, which is to get their man, to get a criminal, to secure a conviction. It's that sort of narrow outlook that I think we've got to change.
Is that because of the people they are, or because of the...
I think they get trained to it in time.
Is that direction into what I'm saying to you?
Yes, you see, a man who has spent years and years in the police, he is living in a particular sort of society. He's living with other policemen, and he is getting an attitude towards criminals, which is not a fair one. He's got to be taught to understand how he can help to rehabilitate the men that he's pursuing, rather than this narrow attitude of just achieving the chalking up of success, which in his terms are convictions. And I think there are too many disturbing examples, which have been well documented, of people who have been wrongly accused and wrongly acquitted because the police have been overzealous in the way that they pursued the particular cases that they've been put on.